Hey guys, hello gorgeous. As many of you have heard, and maybe some of you have not heard, this might be news to you, Hasbro is bringing back Kenner and doing a retro line of Star Wars vintage reissue figures. So this is actually a viewer request video from Jason Swank at Rebel Force Radio, my favorite Star Wars podcast. I've been listening to it for many years, so it's pretty cool to get a request from Jason, but he wanted to know my thoughts on the upcoming reissue Star Wars line. And my thoughts are just basically my thoughts on most of the toy lines that I collect, my reaction to most of the toy news that I see. I gotta wait and see how I feel about it. So when it comes to Kenner Star Wars vintage toys in particular, I didn't grow up on those. Those were just a little bit before my time. My first action figures were G.I. Joe from the 80s. So that's what I have the most feeling of nostalgia towards. And when the Anniversary Joes came out, these guys right here, I had such huge nostalgia for those, seeing them hanging on the peg, because it wasn't just about the figure, it was about the card art. So the bodies were totally different. They were made of like a more rubbery, softer material. They didn't look as well constructed as the originals, but as a package, which I wanted to hang on a wall like that for display, I thought they were fantastic. So I do have a bunch of these vintage collection Star Wars figures, and even though I never bought any as a kid, I did look at pictures of them for years and years and wished I had them. And the images used on them, to me, were just as important as the actual figures were. So when I saw this particular guy on a shelf at a Toys R Us, it wasn't just about the figure. It was about that particular image of Luke Skywalker and all of the other pictures used for all of these figures as well. So that's a big reason why I got all of these and really enjoy them, because not just the figure, but the entire packaging style of it. Since I didn't grow up on Star Wars figures, that particular body, that particular sculpt, the, 5 points of articulation, arms, legs, and head, I don't have nostalgia for it. Because I didn't grow up on those particular figures, when I see something that's that style, like a mask figure, I don't get the nostalgia for it because I didn't grow up on it. I just think, G.I. Joes are above and beyond that style. So that's why I get nostalgia for the Joe body types. So when I see c.o.p.s from c.o.p.s and Crooks, or Visionaries, those are the exact same body style as G.I. Joe, even though they're different sizes. And that's why, to this day, I still love those, because they're in keeping with the G.I. Joe style. Some of the newer figures, the reaction figures, are the old Star Wars Kenner vintage style. And they really don't do much for me because, again, I don't have that Star Wars nostalgia, the original collection. I think it's awesome that they're reissuing the vintage Star Wars figures. I think it's great that people who grew up on them will have an affordable opportunity to own those again. And if it's going to be about the packaging again, about putting it on a wall, maybe making an entire wall, or even maybe using pegs like I do and having figures in behind other figures. There's a custom Salacious Crumb back there. If it's going to be all about the packaging, I would hope that they wouldn't cheap out on the packaging. Unfortunately, what I'm noticing is with some of those Hasbro reissues, I'm going to use the Transformers Walmart reissues as an example. The mini bots just got reissued. The cards are just slightly smaller than the original cards, and if you compare the new cards with the older cards, the paper material feels a little cheaper on the newer ones. Same goes for the boxes. I've got an original Hot Rod box, and I have one of the new reissue Hot Rod boxes. The reissue is cheaper. It definitely feels like a cheaper material, not as glossy. This stuff might not matter to most collectors who are going to open it, display the toy anyway, but if you want to recreate that toy store feel, which is what I like to do as well. I like the open toy, but I also like the toy store display look. These little things matter to toy collectors who have an incredible attention to detail. So these are little things that I'm noticing. Also, materials used on some of the reissues, the Transformer reissues, definitely a lower quality. And I know it is a different time and they have to do things to save money, but I don't think you can market to the adult collector who has a lot of disposable income and has an incredible attention to detail, but then give them really cheap stuff that isn't up to the level of the original thing that they fell in love with. Not fell in like with, fell in love with. Collectors collect these old vintage retro things because they loved these things. They appreciated the quality that went into them, and it rubs me the wrong way when this stuff comes out and it looks very close to the original stuff, but it's noticeably cheaper, lower quality. So when it comes to the Star Wars vintage figures, I don't have the nostalgia for the vintage figures, the bodies. I have a few of them. There's been some really generous donations made to my collection of the vintage stuff, and I love that stuff, but because I didn't grow up on it, because my first real experiences as an adult, it doesn't take me back to a magical time. So, you know, I don't really plan on buying them anyway because I'm happy with these guys right here. I don't go up and press my nose against them and inspect them very closely. I enjoy them from a distance, and from a distance, modern body or vintage body, it doesn't really make much of a difference to me as long as the card art is the same. That's what I really notice. But for people who are really excited or, you know, kind of interested in the Star Wars reissues, I say that it's okay to hold it in your hand and decide. You don't have to make your mind up before ahead of time and decide to buy the entire series before you've even held one in your hand. You're allowed to hold one in your hand. And I know there's issues with pre-orders. Sometimes you do have to go all in before you've even touched the thing. But if you have to order one of the series, the first series, or just one figure, get one figure, hold it in your hand, see how you feel. If it takes you back to a magical time, if it looks and feels the same to you, if it has that special feeling, then keep going until it doesn't do that anymore. But if you order that first figure and you look at it and you go, this paper is really flimsy, I don't remember this being this flimsy, and that's probably because it wasn't that flimsy. And if you look at the figure and you go, it's coming apart at the seams, or the paint is really sloppy, or, you know, that's not the right color, that's not the color he was originally. If it makes you do these things that take away from your joy, then that is not a nostalgic experience. It's not a good experience, so don't do it anymore. Go find something else that makes you happy, and don't waste all of your money on something that you're just going to complain about. So my personal experience, because I don't have the vintage Star Wars experience from my youth, but I do have the vintage G.I. Joe experience, I'm hoping for vintage G.I. Joe reissues, but I feel the exact same way about that. If Hasbro starts reissuing Joes, now that they're reissuing Transformers and they're reissuing Star Wars, maybe they'll reissue G.I. Joe 2 with the original card art. If they do that and they make the announcement, obviously Joe fans worldwide are going to be very excited, but I say, be Joe-like, proceed with caution, and hold one in your hand, and then decide. Even open one up if you're going to display them, play around with them, have them on your desk, and decide. Because if you open these things up and they're made out of a noticeably cheaper material, if the paint job on them is noticeably sloppier, because goodness gracious, the paint job on the original Joes is out of this world. Now that I think about it, I had so many Joes as a kid with absolutely impeccable paint applications. It's incredible when you think about it, compared to these days where you're lucky if you can get an action figure who doesn't get a wonky, derpy eye. If they're able to maintain that level of quality with the G.I. Joe reissue line for an extended period of time, I and many other Joe fans are going to be extremely happy, and the people who can afford them are going to buy a lot of them. But if the company cuts corners in order to make a profit, if they don't, if they're trying to take advantage of the attention to detail and the passion of collectors, but they give them a half-hearted effort, cheaper paper materials, cheaper figure materials, crappy paint applications, all they're going to get is negativity. So the reason these are coming out is because of love, because of the nostalgic, passionate feeling that people have for these things that reawaken. It's time travel. I always say time travel is possible if you care enough. But if they reissue these things and they just make people disappointed, it's just going to end in disaster. These things are going to sit on the shelves, unsold. They're going to go on clearance. Maybe even then people aren't going to buy them. So yeah, that's pretty much my thought on the Star Wars reissues, G.I. Joe reissues, any reissues. I mean, there's lots of old toy lines that I'd love to see reissued, even if I'm not going to buy them. I'm happy with my Silverhawks, my Centurions, all of the stuff in my collection, and I'm pretty much at a point where I don't need to get anything anymore. There's a few fun things that I'd love to add, swap out, trade, but for the most part, I'm satisfied. But I would be so happy that all of the people who appreciate the stuff I do on the rarer lines like Silverhawks, Brave Star, Centurions, Real Ghostbusters, etc., I would be so happy if they got the opportunity to own these things. I love the idea of someone sending me a picture on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook and holding like a reissue Jake Rockwell or Max Ray or like a reissue Quicksilver on card and saying, "Oh my God, I've wanted this one ever since I saw your Toy Museum video." That makes me happy. That's a big part of my toy collecting, is empathy for other people. I don't just get joy out of my own stuff. I get joy from seeing other people happy. So even though I don't really have a huge investment to make in any reissues going forward, I'm very happy for the people who are going to have an opportunity to own brand spanking new, nice and clean, minty fresh reissues of favorites from their childhood that have very special meaning to them, that were given to them by their parents or their grandparents or their friends. So community is a very big part of toy collecting for me. I think it's important to enjoy this with like-minded people, not just all by yourself. There are a lot of great conventions, retro figure conventions, where you can get a lot of your vintage beloved figures if you're not happy with the reissues or the prices of some of the reissues. Some of the prices on those Transformers Walmart reissues is just insane. But you can find some of those original ones at all sorts of great toy conventions. Just do a search for retro toy convention on Google. You'll find a bunch in your area. I live in southern Ontario and there's a whole bunch. Seems like every month or two there's a big convention going on in Toronto, Mississauga, Ajax, the list goes on and on. Unfortunately, I'm not able to do much long distance traveling to a lot of these conventions. I'm pretty much at the mercy, so to speak, of what my shoulder feels like on those days. But there is a toy convention coming to my hometown, just about down the road from where I live. It's the Kitchener Collectibles Expo, which is being held at, I'm just reading the info here off of their Facebook event page, at Bingaman's, 425 Bingaman Center Drive. The admission is very affordable. It's usually $5 there, which is awesome. I don't like going to toy conventions and paying 10 or 20 bucks. Admission shouldn't be the price of a toy. But the Kitchener Collectibles Expo, I'm going to be at that thing on February 24th. So that's next Sunday. It goes from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. I plan on being there around noon. So if you're interested in coming out to that, if it's not too far from where you are in Ontario, come on down. If you see me, come up to me, say hi. We'll chat a little bit, because that's what it's all about. It's about not just enjoying the toys, these great collectibles, these fantastic old characters, but it's also about talking about them, sharing experiences. So if you can make it out to that particular toy show, that's going to be one of the few that I'm able to go to in the area. Otherwise, feel free to share your thoughts, your memories in the comments section below, wherever you may be watching this. So let me know if you're excited about the Star Wars vintage reissue figure line or not, and why or why not. And also keep in mind, if you're not excited about it, just remember that everything leads to something else. So great things can come from things that aren't so great. Something to keep in mind for things like the Transformers movies, the Michael Bay movies. If they're not your cup of tea, just remember a lot of the great Transformers products that are out now are, the door got opened because of those movies. Indiana Jones always comes to mind. There was absolutely no Indiana Jones merchandise anywhere until that Crystal Skull movie came out. So love it or hate it, it blew the doors open for Indiana Jones stuff. So keep an open mind, because things are rarely all bad. Thanks a lot for watching, and until next time, Nerd Stay. Let's see if I still got the touch. Hadouken!